While the Tet Offensive was eventually suppressed, the fighting that had gone on was very intense, so many images, and it left a distinct impression, not only in the American public, but on Foreign Service officers who were in training, because American diplomats who were already assigned in Vietnam began sending back stories. We would listen to tapes sent back of individuals who were hiding in buildings while the Viet Cong were looking for them. We read the stories about the Foreign Service officers dragged outside and executed by the Viet Cong during this time. It became a much more real sense of what could be waiting for us. So this changed the atmosphere at our training. But it was followed by even more events in the United States that turned the country upside down. Senator Eugene McCarthy from Minnesota, anti-war activist, challenged President Lyndon Johnson. Johnson had, before the Tet Offensive, had seemed certain of being renominated and reelected for another term as president. Now McCarthy's challenging him. In March, a few days before the Wisconsin primary, where the polls indicated McCarthy was going to win a big victory, Johnson goes on TV and says he will not be a candidate. He steps down. Early April, just a week later, after McCarthy does win the Wisconsin primary, a few days later, Martin Luther King is murdered. This sets off riots and protests across America. In Washington, D.C., they're widespread. And in fact, buildings are burning. As we'd walk out of the Vietnam Training Center, I could see the black smoke billowing up from buildings in Washington, D.C., right across the Potomac River on fire. The 82nd Airborne Division had to be flown in from Fort Bragg in North Carolina to retake Washington, D.C. I remember driving down through the city and seeing airborne troops with bayonets on street corners, enforcing curfew and ensuring that the protests and riots would stop. 2 months later, Robert Kennedy is assassinated. Had been running for president to replace Johnson, shot to death in a hotel. Funeral is held in Washington, D.C. I remember sitting in my apartment at Arlington Towers, looking out the window and seeing his hearse drive across Memorial Bridge, going up to Arlington Cemetery. That summer, the Democratic Party political convention in Chicago is beset with violent protests. The police to come out and put it down with force in the streets in Chicago. And Hubert Humphrey secures the nomination. He runs against Richard Nixon. Nixon wins by about 1 percentage point in November to become president, 2 weeks before I'm to leave for Vietnam. And it becomes clear with Nixon's new approach of Vietnamization that America no longer saw Vietnam as a place where we would be out to win the war, but somehow now to find some way to disengage. The whole premise, the whole sense of America as this triumphal country who could do almost anything following World War II had been shattered in one tumultuous year. And so with that atmosphere, I was going to have to leave to go to Vietnam, but I had one other thing I had to do first.